Welcome to episode 26 of Mina Narrates. I'm your host, Mina. Thanks for joining me in my library. This episode features CaseyWere-Alien's Help Me, It's Cold. Now, let me whisper in your ears. With leaves and snow crunching underfoot, I couldn't believe I was here. That this was how my friends decided to spend our last Halloween together. In all the years I've known them, you'd think I'd know they would want to go to the local cemetery instead of something normal. A B&E charge was not exactly on my priority list before leaving for college. But here we were, George, Savannah, and I sneaking through what was supposed to be the most haunted cemetery in town. I guess I couldn't complain too much. The cemetery was boarded up, just like the old asylum it sat on, and the police had taken it off their route years ago. Sometime back in the 1950s, 2 young boys went missing out here and were never found. Being a town with a population smaller than most Walmart supercenters, it didn't take long for the town to abandon the cemetery and avoid it. George and Savannah were so sure that 60 years later we'd find answers. The 3 of us were always the weird kids, but George and Savannah took the weird cake. They started dating our freshman year and had been by each other's side since. What made them so odd, though, was their obsession with the paranormal and the occult. George's basement was filled with homemade paranormal gear, books, maps, anything he thought would help him catch a ghost. Savannah was just as bad, though her collection seemed to feature more magical items. Boxes of sage, books on necromancy, and some very unsettling oddities she claimed were haunted. It was during third period history they decided that exploring the cemetery would be the best option for Halloween. The teacher was rambling on about local history when the abandoned asylum came up. It's the first and longest running in our state. She went on about how even though the treatments were cruel, they helped advance the field of psychology. It didn't take long before our classmates started questioning the disappearances. The teacher tried to move the subject along, but being rowdy high schoolers, they couldn't let it go. "I heard the boys fell through an open grave that was the portal to hell," one boy in the back yelled out. "No way! Everyone knows it was a serial killer in our area at the time," the meek girl behind us retorted. "I bet they just got tired of the shithole town and left," someone called out. As the conspiracy theories unraveled, George leaned over to me. "You know the old cemetery is haunted, right? They say the boys were taken by ghosts there to avenge the wrongs they suffered." I sighed. "Sure, George. And your dad's Bigfoot." "I'm being serious. That cemetery is old, like old. And the legend says that when the treatment didn't work, and they couldn't stand the patients anymore, they'd bury them alive." Savannah looks at us excitedly. "You know, you can still see the bells at the graves. The ones they'd tie a string to, then they'd tie the other end to the dead person's finger. That way if they made a..." She paused for a second and very dramatically drew out the next words with finger quotes. "Mistake, they'd come and rescue you from your grave." The problem was that it was never a mistake. They wanted to know when their problems were good and dead. George was already making a list of supplies when he glanced up. "You know what we're going to have to do tonight, right?" No. I was not about to go running through some old cemetery in the cold when we had already agreed on watching classic horror and eating all the candy my mom said we would be handing out. We made plans that don't involve a police escort when we get caught. Oh, come on. It's our last Halloween together. Plus, our parents will all be at the party at town hall. So will the whole 3 cops in our town. It's not like we have any parties to go to." Savannah had a point. Being the outcasts, we weren't exactly frequent flyers in the high school party circuit. "We may as well go out with a bang. We can go there, explore, maybe solve our town's biggest mystery ever, and take the candy with us." October in Idaho. It's never as easy as going out and exploring. My town is known for having to design costumes to fit over snowsuits. You know it's going to be absolutely freezing tonight, right? George threw the eraser he had been fiddling with at me. So wear a jacket and boots. You'll be fine. We'll meet you at your house at 9. The party at the courthouse starts at 9:30, so if we leave at 9:45, it should give us plenty of time to get ready and avoid everyone going to it. The bell rang, and I gathered my papers as we went off to the next class. The day dragged on slowly as I dreaded our new Halloween plans. Snow and twigs crunched underfoot as we quickly walked to the cemetery. George hadn't even waited 5 minutes after my mom left before he was out the door. Our plan was already going to hell, and I was stuck along for the ride. EMF detector, full spectrum camera, voice recorder, sage, holy water. George paused as he rummaged through his bag. And this. He pulled out a stained wad of fabric out of his bag, thrusting it at us like it was the Holy Grail. "What's that?" Savannah said as she recoiled from it. "An antique straitjacket, duh." "Why do you even have that?" George was strange, but I never pegged him for roleplay bondage strange, and I couldn't imagine him having a straitjacket for any other reasons. "My aunt owns the antique shop in town. She got boxes of stuff from the asylum in town in some storage unit she won at auction. I'm still not understanding why you have it. It's called a trigger object, duh. Ghosts react to things that remind them of their lives. Everyone knows that. And what better way to get the attention of someone who died at the asylum than a straitjacket?" Somehow Savannah and I managed to sigh at the same time. "You are an idiot. If you died in an asylum, wouldn't a straitjacket just be enraging and upsetting?" I stared at him. We had just reached the gate of the cemetery, and I was really starting to question how I always managed to get talked into his adventures. "Well, yeah, but the emotional response should be strong enough so they manifest." "Manifest long enough to throttle you?" Even Savannah was starting to second-guess our being here. Not enough, though, as she quickly fumbled with the large cast iron padlock on the gate. It didn't take her long to manage to pick it. The three of us quickly put our weight against the gate and shoved. Slowly it creaked open into what would be our playground for the night. It was the first time I really noticed how large the cemetery was. There were a few standing markers and one obelisk. Savannah suddenly whispered in solemn tone, "You know, if you died here, you were usually forgotten. It was shameful to have any sort of disorder. Families didn't want to associate with it. That's why there's almost no headstones. Once you were put here, no one cared. You were out of sight, out of mind." Just then, a gust of wind swept over the cemetery, and in the distance we could hear soft ringing of bells. Over the quiet chiming, I could almost swear I heard a woman whisper. I shook it off, assuming someone else had broken in for some Halloween fun. George was way too excited to be here, almost exhaustingly so as he passed Savannah and I our designated equipment for the night. He, however, clung to the straitjacket as though it may have blown away in the wind. "Just past the obelisk is supposed to be the newest area of the cemetery. I heard they abandoned it so quickly there's still open graves. We should start there," he said, shaking with anticipation. Or because of the cold. I couldn't be sure which. "Brilliant! So we can fall into the graves and freeze to death before finals next month. Solid plan." I couldn't grasp what about snow and open pits sounded appealing. "We're here to solve a mystery, so why not check the newest part? That's where all the evidence would be." Savannah's logic was terrifyingly sound. And when they agreed with each other, there was no arguing with them. I followed behind them as they started for the area they were talking about. Then it came again, just a whisper on the wind. But this time I swore I could hear, "Help me." It sounded like a girl. Not a girl, but a young woman maybe. I stopped to listen. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Savannah turned to me with a concerned expression. "A woman just said, 'Help me.'" "Ha ha ha. Very funny. You can't scare us that easy," George said as he played with the buckle on the jacket. "No, dude, I'm being dead-ass serious. I've heard it twice now." We're the only ones here and we haven't even set anything up yet. There's no way you heard anything." His vote of confidence in my sanity was wildly reassuring, especially considering I didn't even want to be there. "Fine, whatever. Let's just get this over with before we freeze to death." I jogged to catch up with them before we started walking again. All around us, I could see various markers sticking out of the snow and bells. They would ring occasionally, but as we got closer and closer to the new section of the cemetery, the bells got farther and fewer between. "Over there," George shouted excitedly, pointing at an indentation in the snow. "That's where we should set up." "And why is that?" I asked, knowing I really didn't want to know. Savannah walked over and threw a rock down the indent. "It's an open grave! Look, the snow is flat everywhere, and the rock sank deeper than our feet go in the snow." I was just glad we didn't happen to find it by falling in. "So what good does an open grave do us if we're trying to get dead people to help us solve a mystery of missing boys? Wouldn't one that's sorta occupied have a body for us to talk to?" "Well, maybe the boys fell in and are haunting it or something. I don't know. I just have a good feeling about this. Help me get the equipment set up." I sighed and kneeled down with George to start laying everything out. I was turning on the voice recorder as he laid the straitjacket across the grave when I heard it. "It's cold." I froze and stared at George and Savannah. He was admiring his handiwork as Savannah tried to light some sage. "Guys, did you hear that?" "What did you hear now?" Savannah said as she waved the sage around. "She said it's cold." "Well, no shit, it's cold," George snorted. "There's snow on the ground and we're outside." I looked down at the recorder in my hand and hit the replay button. All that came out of its sad little speakers were the sounds of us walking and talking our way here. And then the light faded. I smacked it in my hand and stared at George. He quickly dug through his backpack. "Shit, I left the spare batteries at home." "Great," I thought to myself. I looked up, and behind the obelisk in the distance, I saw something move. It was a figure, pale and wispy, taller than any of us. "What are you staring at?" Savannah looked concerned, and was now holding her sage towards the obelisk like some sort of sword. "Nothing." They already didn't believe I was hearing things, and I wasn't about to push my luck. Savannah pulled a small blanket out of the bag, and we quietly sat on it. We were now down a crucial piece of equipment, but that didn't make George any less determined. He checked the camera's frame and held out the EMF detector. "Is there anyone here with us?" "Nope, just 3 frostbitten fools camping in a graveyard instead of basking in the glory of vintage Vincent Price movies." He elbowed me hard and I winced. When I opened my eyes, I saw it again. She was there in front of the obelisk, staring. I could see her hair whipping in the wind and what looked like a tattered hospital gown wrapping itself around her. I couldn't contain myself. I gasped and pointed, but by the time my friends turned to look, she was gone. They both stared at me before laughing it off and continuing with the questions. By that time, I was too scared and cold to focus on what they were saying. Every time the wind blew, I could hear the voice carried on it. "Help me, it's cold." Every gust brought the voice closer and closer, and right as I thought I was going to have a mental breakdown, George's voice calling, ringing back into my ears. "Did you take the boys?" He suddenly jumped up with a burst of excitement. "Look at the reading on the detector. This is off the charts." We leaned over, and sure enough, the detector was at its max. "This is clearly something. There's got to be something here making it jump like that." Just then, in a crackling voice, the recorder sprang to life, screeching, "Help me, it's cold. Help me, it's cold." Over and over again. I sprang back, knowing this is what I had been hearing all along. George and Savannah were too focused on the recorder to pay attention to what was around them, and maybe it was better they didn't. Suddenly the figure appeared between me and them as they fumbled with the recorder next to the grave. I could see her in her full horror now. She wasn't tall. Her feet weren't touching the ground. Her head rolled slightly to one side. I could just see her bare socket. Her skin was mottled, a mix of deep greens and reds. Her shoulders and spine protruded from the back of the hospital gown, and her hair spun wildly around her head. The bells all around the cemetery started rattling violently with a harmony that could only be described as monstrous. Before I could move, there was a violent scream, and the words, "Help me, I'm cold," reverberated through the cemetery. George and Savannah looked up just in time for this creature, this monster, to grab them by their throats and dive into the open grave with them. They didn't even have an opportunity to scream. I ran home, called the police, and now I'm here. So no, officer, my friends didn't run away. I don't know where they are, but I doubt you will ever find them. That was 8 months ago. The police didn't believe me, at least not totally. They were dumbfounded when they found all of our tracks walking into the cemetery, but just mine leaving. When the snow thawed, they excavated and found a body, but it wasn't either of my friends. It was that of a tall young woman with her eye torn out. After months of investigation, we learned she was one of the last patients of the hospital. They were in the process of shutting it down when the boys disappeared. The police think she saw what happened, and whoever took or killed the boys threw her in the grave, still alive. The grave had been dug but never used because it filled with groundwater, and with the cemetery and the asylum closed, there wasn't a need to fill it back in. The police say she laid in there, and she was able to keep her head above water for maybe an hour before hypothermia hit. She probably called and called for help, but it wasn't until too late that the boys were reported missing, and by the time the police checked the cemetery, the water had frozen, so they assumed the boys couldn't be there. So she laid there for years, freezing and thawing year after year. According to the official report, George and Savannah ran away together like teen couples do. But I know the truth. At night, on the wind, I can still hear the bells. But her voice has been replaced with George and Savannah's. Sometimes they cry, but usually they whisper, "Help us, we're cold." Thank you for listening to Help Me, It's Cold by CaseyWere-Alien, and making it to the end of the story. This was her first post on Reddit. I think she did a wonderful job with it. While she has no books I can point you to go buy, I can tell you she has many stories on Reddit like this one, which I will provide a link to in the description. I'm also adding a link to her Etsy account. Casey has been providing her crafts at reasonable prices to provide the best products she can for her customers. Check her writing and her crafts out. What did you think of this story? I know it's more of a Halloween story than a Christmas or Yuletide story, but I thought it was kind of interesting how the story had so much based in cold and snow. The young woman's death in ice, with her thawing and freezing every year. She had to be dead before the first thaw. This means she probably didn't realize she was dead at first. Her anger at being left to her fate had to be beyond anything we can imagine. Then George asked if she took the boys. Did she take George and Savannah to punish the living, or to show them what happened to the boys and her? Let me know what you think in the comments. While you're down there, please give the video a like and share out. If you aren't subscribed, consider subscribing and ringing the bell so it rings so you don't miss the next video. I want to say thank you to all of you who have subscribed. I appreciate your faith in me and enjoyment of my content. I love and appreciate all of you. Thank you to everyone who has been so welcoming, supportive, and helpful. Until we meet again, have a wonderful day or night, and be safe.